Woman by Nikki Giovanni. She wanted to be a blade of grass amid the fields, but he wouldn't agree to be a dandelion.
She wanted to be a robin singing through the leaves, but he refused to be her tree.
She spun herself into a web, and looking for a place to rest, turned to him, but he stood straight, declining to be her corner.
She tried to be a book, but he wouldn't read. She turned herself into a bulb, but he wouldn't let her grow.
She decided to become a woman, and though he still refused to be a man, she decided it was all right.
Hi, Alyssa. So today I'm going to be interviewing you regarding Nikki Giovanni's poem, Women. So my first question is, what was your initial reaction when you first read the poem?
So when I first read this poem, I initially thought that it was about a relationship between a man and a woman because it talks about she and he and what she does and what he does. But when I reached the end of the poem, I realized that's much more than that. As I reached the end of the poem, I realized that it was intentional for Nikki Giovanni to include the woman's perspective more than the man. I also thought that Nikki Giovanni's writing style contributed significantly towards the meaning of the poem and what she wanted the readers to get out of it. And so for my impression of the poem, I understood that this woman wanted to explore herself and she wanted to put herself out there and just be who she wanted to be, but she felt like she was being pulled back by the man who refused to support her and be there for her. And it talks about how she wanted to be like a blade of grass amid the fields, but he refused to be the dandelion. And when she wanted to create her web, he refused to be her corner. Like just small things that he didn't want to do for her and didn't want to provide for her, and she felt deprived of expressing herself. But towards the end, she realizes that she can be a woman without the man wanting to be a man, because it says that he refuses to become a man, but she realizes that it's fine and she can still become a woman and it's all right.
All right, so my second question is, what literary elements stood out to you when reading the poem, and how did it affect the way the message was conveyed?
So throughout this poem, I was able to identify the main literary element as symbolism because it was very consistent throughout the poem, and in each stanza, the main character as a woman referred to herself as either a blade of grass or a robin singing in the leaves or a spider who wanted to create her web or a book or a light bulb. And in each stanza following that, the man was the one who refused to be a corresponding symbol to that. So he didn't want to be the dandelion, he didn't want to be the branch, and he didn't want to become a man, basically. And we saw that at the end of the poem, but while you were reading, we were able to get this idea, this pre-concept that he didn't want to commit to his responsibilities for supporting her and encouraging the woman who she wanted to become, whether she wanted to become a robin. And I feel like even without the last stanza that it finally broke it down for us, we would still be able to get a general concept of Giovanni's intended message due to the symbolism in the poem.
All right, very good. So the next question is, what symbols did you find in the poem, and how did you interpret them?
Adding on to my previous response, I think it's critical for me as the reader to actually go into depth with the specific symbols, such as the first one when she refers to herself as a blade of grass. Initially, you kind of just think it's weird that she wants to be grass, but when you think about it, a blade of grass amid a whole field, a whole open field of millions of other blades of grasses, I think I just got the interpretation that she wanted to feel free and open and like to escape any feeling of restrictiveness, and I feel like that contributes to how she felt like she couldn't be a woman by herself. Like she wanted to be out and experience that open world, but she needed that support from the man. She thought she needed that support from the man, who didn't want to be her dandelion. He didn't want to provide her with that benefit of knowing that she can be by herself and that it'll be okay. And the next symbol after that, which I found very like unique and resembling of the poem, was when she said she wanted to web herself like in her own spider web, and that he refused to be her corner. And I just got this instant image in my mind of how you can't build a house if you don't have property. You can't build a company with a business that's not existent. You have to have a stable foundation, like establishment that you can go back to and when you need to. And as a woman, she felt like she couldn't be in the world without that sort of establishment, and she thought she had to find that in the man. But later on in the poem, she realizes that she can find it through herself. She doesn't need the man to provide her with those needs.
Very good, Alyssa.
Thank you.
So your last question is, what would you say is the tone of the poem, and where do you see it in the context?
So the first word that comes to mind when reading this poem is empowering, because it's almost serves as an advocate for women and their individuality and their ability to be independent without needing to rely on men, especially in the stanzas where it talks about how the man refused to be a part of her journey of self-exploration. He refused to support her and encourage her. And when finally she decided that she could do it by herself and that she was okay while doing it and that she didn't have to rely on anyone else, it's very empowering to Giovanni's readers in knowing that there are women out there who feel like they lack any sense of control over their lives and their ability to venture out into the world, such as the woman in the poem. Certain words that stood out to me when trying to identify the tone was words such as wanted to and but, because wanted to represents her wanting to be something more, do something more, but the but is a contradiction to why she couldn't do it and what she felt like she was missing out on. And that really contributed to how the reaction of the readers, because it provokes them to think about what the woman is missing out on, and how in the end she realizes she isn't missing out on she doesn't have to miss out on anything, because she doesn't have to have that contradiction in her life, and she can just go about without it. Hi, Luis.
Hi, Alyssa.
So I just wanted to ask you a few questions today regarding the poem Woman by Nikki Giovanni. So the first question I wanted to ask you was, what stood out to you regarding the diction of Giovanni's writing style?
So regarding Nikki Giovanni's diction and writing style, I did notice that Nikki broke down her thoughts into stanzas, meaning that each stanza was its own individual thought. And this stood out to me because it was really easy to identify what she was trying to say in each stanza. Regarding diction, I did notice that Nikki Giovanni used the words he and she a lot. She used them throughout her poem, and they were found in every stanza. And the reason why this stood out to me was because he and she were never identified. They were never specified exactly who they were, and they were always generalized. And considering the fact that they were mentioned multiple times, it was pretty interesting to see that they were very important to the poem, yet they were never identified. Um, on top of that, I did notice that Nikki Giovanni started off each of her stanzas with the word she followed by a verb. For instance, Nikki started her stanzas with she wanted, she spun herself, she tried, she turned, and she decided. And to me, the way I interpreted this was that Nikki Giovanni wanted the woman of the poem to take action. Throughout the poem, you can see that she's taking action, and at the end of the poem, she takes action and she becomes the woman that she wants to be. And this is basically the main message of the poem, and I found it to be very significant and very interesting.
So, for the second question, I wanted to ask you, how would you describe the dramatic situation of this poem?
So, the way that I would describe and identify the dramatic situation of the poem would be by talking about the relationship that is found in it. The woman of the poem is in a relationship, but it's very one sided on her part. She's the one who's fully invested into it. She's 100% committed into it and is willing to sacrifice herself, but the man does not feel the same way. These unrequited feelings are basically the main issue and the main conflict of the poem. She feels this way towards this man, but the man doesn't return these feelings. And the woman feels like she needs his approval, she needs his support in order to become a successful and strong woman. But towards the end of the poem, she realizes that this is not true. Adding on to that, at the end of the poem, we can see that the conflict is resolved. It's solved because she realizes that the man refuses to be there for her. The man refuses to be by her side, but that doesn't stop her from becoming the woman that she wants to be. And she realizes that it's all right to be alone if you're strong and independent because you don't have to rely on a man to do so.
Good answer.
Thank you, Alyssa.
So, what impression do you get from the speaker? In this case, it would be Nikki Giovanni. Were you able to identify the poet's audience appeal?
So, my impressions on Nikki Giovanni are that she's a very strong and independent woman, and she doesn't need anyone or anything to be successful or to be who she wants to be. And the reason why I think this is true is because I feel like Nikki Giovanni was able to connect with the woman of the poem. I feel like Nikki herself is capable of loving and being passionate and dedicating herself and completely just giving her all. But when she realizes that it's time to stand up for herself and be independent, she is able to do so without any hesitation. And because of this, I feel like Nikki was trying to appeal to a young female audience. Typically, young females struggle with realizing that they're more than capable of doing what they want without the approval of any male. And being the strong, independent woman that Nikki is, she felt that she was able to be the example and be that person to show young women that it's possible to be strong and independent and not need any man. And I feel that by doing this, she really appealed to the young female audience in a very successful way.
So, since you're a guy and the poem is about a woman, how do you think your interpretation would be different from a woman's perspective like mine?
So obviously, Nikki Giovanni wrote the poem through a female's perspective, and it was very unconventional in the sense that the poem did not depict women to be the weaker gender. In fact, it showed that women are more than capable of having very strong emotions. They're capable of loving and being passionate and giving their all and investing themselves in whatever they're doing. And being the male that I am and reading this poem and interpreting it, it was very empowering and it was a very nice reminder that women are aware of this. Women are aware that they don't need anyone to be successful. They don't need a man to help them remember their self worth or to support them, and that women are actually a lot more stronger than men because they do have to live in a society that has taught everyone that women are the weaker gender and that they are more vulnerable and inferior than we are, which is not true. I feel that being a male, my focus was more on the idea that women are just as powerful as men, and comparing my point of view or my focus to a female whom I read this poem, I feel like their focus was more on the idea of self empowerment and reminding that they are just as strong. And although my interpretation might be a little different from a female's interpretation of the poem, they do come together at the end, and we do share the same idea that women and men are equal, and that that one of them isn't inferior from the other.
Okay, so the last question we're going to answer together is, what does this poem mean to us?
I agree with Alyssa because after all, the author of the poem was a girl, and I felt that through the women who she's referring to in the poem, she was able to like connect, and she was able to say what she actually was feeling. Like she was able to like connect personally and like speak her thoughts through the poem, and I thought that that was very significant.
And after reading the poem, I personally found it helpful that it was just from the woman's perspective, because although it contributed to like the overall theme and idea of the poem, it also helped the reader to analyze and focus on just the woman's perspective, because that's what the poet wanted the reader to really understand and know that that was the most significant aspect of the poem.